All right, so I wanted to make a little response. It's gonna be kind of off the cuff, but it is something that I'm going to address. So I'm sure all of the people are saying, "Oh, well, Dead Space remake didn't sell well, and all this other stuff going on, and a lot of doom scrolling. Does that invalidate the Criticism Sucks series of Dead Space?" And I'm just gonna say this for the record. No. I thought Dead Space Remake was a fantastic game, and no amount of psychobabble is going to deter the obvious that the game played well, felt well, was mostly solid all around, outside of a few technical hiccups that I had with Isaac in the corner and him not aiming his plasma cutter, but overall, a very solid foundation for what could be. I'm not taking back anything on that. I personally, the narrative that people had against the game was mostly puerile at best, grade school stuff, tinfoil hat conspiracy theories that really did fuck all to damage the reputation of the game, which is mostly received in a positive light. The real thing, the real reality of what these people will not tell you is that Dead Space itself has struggled as a financially viable franchise. Even EA considered Dead Space 2 to be not financially viable when it came out, and the sales that it got, that wasn't good enough for them. But none of these people will go back and say, "Oh, was the original Dead Space 2 woke because it failed sales wise?" No, they're not going to tell you that, because in their brain they know they would be 100% incorrect, erroneous, and wrong. My thoughts on this is that I believe that all of this is a wait and see affair. There's nothing really concrete with what people are saying, all the doom scrolling that's going on, because we got a report that said, and it was an incorrect report initially from Jeff Grubb, where he said, "Oh, Dead Space 2 remake was codenamed in development. It was being made, it was in pre-production, and it got canceled." Obviously, the headlines are going to be like, if a game got canceled, it's going to be worse because time, resources, money, and activity was put into that game and it got canceled out of the blue. We know how cancellations work in pre-production and how Factions 2 really hurt Naughty Dog when that got canceled. They lost money, time, and resources for canceling that game. Then Grubb was corrected by Jason Schreier, and Jason said, like, he said something to the effect, like, they had a pitch for Dead Space 2 remake and a new game entirely, and the new game was starting to hurtle along almost into pre-production before they decided to scrap those ideas, focus on being a two-man team at Motive, and work on the new Battlefield and work on Iron Man, essentially, right? This caused people to have a stir in comments and say, "Oh, well, Dead Space is now on ice. It's not being made anymore. The future of Dead Space is in jeopardy." And personally speaking, my thoughts on that is, let's wait and see before actually going off the fucking radar and freaking out and doom scrolling 100% of the time, because we don't know the future of EA Motive. We don't know the future of these projects. For all we know, these projects that they are working on could be the catalyst for more Dead Space games in the future. This is why people don't think outside the box, because they want to tick their own agenda and not really think too much. So let's go back in the past to Visceral Games. Visceral Games, like after Dead Space 1, a lot of their titles were hit or miss sales wise, review wise. It was probably going great. Dead Space 2 great. Dead Space 3 was we know how that turned out, and they worked on, I think they worked on Battlefield Hardline as well. I'm trying to refresh my memory, but I don't think all of those titles really went well, and that's when they got the axe. EA is very candid and sincere on canceling studios. They will tell you flat out, "Hey, Visceral was liquidated. I'm sorry, their projects didn't turn out well. Well, after Battlefield Hardline, we're going to consolidate them and put them into another firm entirely and liquidate the entire team." I get being worried because we seen this shit happen before, but until it happens, we got nothing to really talk about. There's nothing to really go on about here until it happens to Motive. Could it happen? Absolutely, but it's all hypotheticals. It's all hypotheticals in doomscrolling, and we don't know if Iron Man or Battlefield is going to be successful. And if it is, I mean, all right, we have a successful team inside of EA. Let's think about it business-wise, because I know some of the people coming at me for this, they're not thinking in a business sense. We're going to put Dead Space away for a bit. We're going to have them work on Iron Man and work on the other game. So, like, a lot of things go on in development. So they're probably like, oh, let's just jump right into Dead Space 4. I don't think that's a good idea. Dead Space 4 is an idea that requires a lot of, like, synergy, a lot of ideas from previous lore with Dead Space Remake. I think they need to make the whole trilogy, remake the whole thing, and then make Dead Space 4. Pitches get denied all the time. I even said this in my comments. Silent Hill 2 as a pitch for a remake got denied by Konami. Hexadrive did not impress them. The publisher denied it before they accepted it again with Bloober Team. We've seen this before, where a pitch is accepted, then denied, then accepted later. Like, this is how game development works. I don't understand people when they do this. So if Motive is successful with the other projects that they're working on, that's just gonna funnel the hypothetically unsuccessful franchise, which is Dead Space, after the first one. The first one sold well. After that, it's been very, very weird and sort of weird, like, reports, even on the best game, Dead Space 2, where the sales weren't up to snuff for EA. I think EA wants way too much money for Dead Space to begin with. I don't think it's this whole, oh, woke ESG garbage is why Dead Space failed. No, I think they demand way too much money for this franchise, and it showed with Dead Space 2, which signifies once again, and I'm saying this smart and intelligently, which signifies again that these people that go after the sales of Dead Space don't seem to understand how bad and mismanaged the sales projections were on behalf of the publisher itself, which is why they try to include risky business and bad transactions in Dead Space 3. Like, what if their sales projections, they want way too much money for a horror franchise? 4 million copies of Dead Space 2 was not enough, and they deemed it as a failure. Think about it, because they personally, supposedly, you know, I'm just gonna say supposedly, went over budget with that game. Deemed it as a failure at 4 million, well reviewed in the 90s, right? Everything I said in Criticism Sucks for Dead Space is 100% my opinion. I'm not taking it back. I'm not walking it back. I'm being calm about this. This is a wait and see affair for the future. The future is not set. And if EA Motive is successful, I know I want to get to that point. I want to really get to that point, but it's off the cuff. They're just going to use that money from Iron Man and Battlefield to fund the next Dead Space. I mean, think about it. They have full freedom, creative freedom, to do whatever the fuck they want if those games pop off. We've seen creative freedom with Naughty Dog, right? When Uncharted was booming, Sony said you could do whatever the fuck you want. You could do anything you want, make anything you want, do what you want. If EA Motive gets that creative freedom, then it's fine. Like, it's what I wanted. I want them to go against the grain and be like, look, EA, we make bangers for you. We make games that are selling. These 2 projects you put us on, that shit is selling. Let's go back and do what we want. We have the authority to do what we want. And if they end up making another Dead Space, fine. But I don't know why people are freaking out. Like, again, part of me understands it, but I think some of these arguments are tailor-made and given for the wrong reasons. No thinking outside the box of the sort. Just, oh, it's over. Dead Space is dead. You know, EA Motive are not going to tell us games that aren't in development. So I don't know why people are saying, oh, I went to Motive's page and I saw we're a 2-person team, a 2-operation team for projects, and we're working on Iron Man and Battlefield. That's it. They're not going to tell us shit. We don't hear about news like this often from developers who talk about non-greenlit projects unless it's been like years later, or it's a super insider, or they left the company and now they can talk about it. We don't hear about developers answering non-greenlit projects immediately to the fan base. And I think, you know, I see why people ask them this question, because Motive has been candid and sincere to the audience because of the alpha testing for Dead Space Remake. They were very open with that, very honest, and they had to be, because I think people put a shotgun to the back of EA's head when they were reviving this series, and they already fell out of trust because of Visceral. So as much as we want to see Dead Space flourish, if it's in the can for a while now and they need time to reevaluate the series, so be it. We waited a decade for Dead Space to be revived. A full 10 years. This shit is chess, it ain't checkers. A studio wants to ensure their future. That's fine. I'm gonna probably get Iron Man anyway. I'm a superhero fan anyway. I'm excited for that. It reminds me of the same shit where DMC fans were not excited that Dragon's Dogma 2 was coming out. Well, the success of that game is probably going to fuel Devil May Cry 6. The shit is chess, it ain't checkers. It ain't checkers, man. And all of this weird destructive criticism that people are giving out to EA Motive and all that shit, that stuff is for the birds. That is for the birds to me. That is not logical to me in the slightest. You know, it means absolute zero. It means nothing until I hear the words spoken from EA Motive themselves about Dead Space. That's when I start taking more validity. But until there's actual confirmation on the sales figures of Dead Space Remake and how that game actually moved, and it not being just reports internally and journals getting things right or wrong, or trying to guesstimate in between, then there's nothing to really converse about whatsoever. Until it's like prime and dotted on the line that EA comes out and said, oh, this game was a financial failure, which they had no problem doing and confirming with Dead Space 2 OG, saying that didn't live up to expectations sales wise, then yeah, we're just sitting on straws and waiting for something to finally be pulled, right? Because from what I'm reading, there's one report that says it did well, there's another report that says it didn't do well. I don't know which one it is. But hey, what do I know? It's not like EA put out Dead Space Remake near RE4 and they were probably expecting Call of Duty numbers with a significantly niche genre, right? It's not like that didn't happen, and that might be the real reason if we entertain all of the figures that Dead Space 1 Remake failed on sales expectations. Maybe it's time to dial that back. The mindless consumption of the COVID pandemic, I'm sure that made you guys a lot of money when people were inside closed doors and they were constantly buying up games and you were constantly outputting things. I'm sure you probably think that still existed in 2023, but the reality of the situation is the 2020 craze of that is over, and now more competition, time, and effort is put into the field with said money. I think this is mostly a problem with publishers in general, where they have this overflated, oh, it's gonna sell like 5 million copies. It's not gonna do copies over even the original Dead Space 2, and even the original Dead Space 2, they thought it was a flop. You know, maybe dial that back a little bit. Maybe think a little bit about how much a Dead Space game will realistically sell. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, not 5 or 6 million fucking copies, or even 7 million. Are you crazy? And if we're gonna be technical about how Jason Schreier coordinates things. I mean, he doesn't have like 100% foresight into the future anyway, because I remember he corrected someone on The Last of Us Part 2 factions being canceled beforehand. And you know, I don't agree with my friend when he brought up this point, but it still is a lack of foresight. Jason Schreier corrected someone that said, oh, The Last of Us Part 2 factions was canceled, right? He said that's a person that doesn't have a valid source, that doesn't have valid information. Ultimately, it ended up being canceled later. Jason was right and wrong about that information. He was right in the fact that Naughty Dog was still working on it at the time, but he was wrong because it ultimately ended up being canceled anyway, so he tried to correct someone on that. All these journals, now he might have got GTA 6 right with the leak, but all of these journals are not right with inside information 100% of the time. You gotta, even Jason Schreier, he didn't call that at all. Like, at the time being, that guy was technically right how it ended up, but he was not fully correct in that assessment of saying, oh, it's just a random stray Twitter account, you know, who cares, right? No, it ended up being canceled. They were working on it at the time, ended up being canceled. So anything can happen in game development. I think Dead Space fans should honestly just wait and see. Hopefully we don't have to wait another 10 years and they see that, hey, that remake was actually kind of fire gameplay wise. You know, all the people are gonna rant and cry about faces in bathrooms, but they probably never even touched it or played it themselves to validate anything whatsoever. So where's their validity? None. They're just sitting here with their dick in their hands over sales and stuff like that. And you know, I understand sales can make the benefits. It can make the benefits in the long run, but EA just hasn't been really good with tallying of this series in terms of estimated sales figures since Dead Space 1. That went off really well with the OG. And then after that, the sales got weirder. They started to have studio interference. If anything, I'm so fucking happy that Dead Space Remake did not have studio interference whatsoever. Tons of fucking micros. It turned out to be a solid game. That's what's gonna stick in the long run. That is gonna be the game's legacy, actually not being tainted by the inside of EA. And I couldn't have it any other way, honestly. I'm not freaking out about this. Why are people doom scrolling so hard about that? I don't get it. Like, part of me understands the disappointment side. You're not getting Dead Space anytime soon, but why are people suddenly saying the franchise is no more? We thought that last time before the remake, and we got the remake. Straight down and up the middle, this is a wait and see affair. If Motive gets more creative freedom, I think that's going to be the best solution for them in the long run. They could become untouchable, unstoppable, and like, who the fuck puts your MVP on the bench? Like, who? At least with Visceral, like, you could argue they made fun games, but they didn't sell that well. They didn't reach that peak of Dead Space 1. Like, if you're making projects that sell well after the fact and they review well after the fact, then who the fuck are like, and it's EA. I know it is a possibility, but logically speaking, if you're making money for a company, who the fuck puts your star player on the bench? Like, I just can't foresee a situation like that unless they don't make money for EA. That's the only way. Unless they don't make money, they don't make profits, they don't make revenue. None of their stuff after the fact even lights a fire in the gaming industry. We don't know. But all this political garbage and whatnot being spewed about, oh, this and that failed. This is all right. How did Dead Space 2 OG fail then, sales wise? If you want to be real candid about sales, motherfucker. All right, how did that game fail? I'm sure it wasn't all ESG and all this other stuff. No. EA had way too many high expectations for a horror franchise. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. You want to use something to fuel your narrative when it doesn't even make sense when you say it out loud. None of that shit I said made any sense trying to explain it to you guys and saying it out loud. That's how ignorant some of these people are. They want to have gotchas. They don't want to have common sense. All right. And I'm not like that. I rather would have them tell me straight up to my face, this is why X, Y, and Z franchise is done and no more. So I can decide, am I going to stop supporting you? Or do I think it's sound as an argument? As a person who loves Dead Space and video games, you know, I was off the wagon when they said this the first time about Visceral. Off the wagon without thinking about it. And then I thought about it and I'm like, yeah, a lot of Visceral's games really didn't sell that great after Dead Space 1. And that's sometimes the simple answer. That's sometimes the reality of the situation. Sometimes they have too high inflated expectations. Now I think Iron Man is gonna, I think that's gonna do well. Like fucking superhero shit has been doing really great. So I'm sure like a good superhero game, it's gonna sell on clout alone and word of mouth. And if it's like really fun, people are gonna buy it. They're gonna buy that shit. Battlefield remains to be determined. The last one was not so great in terms of reception, but I'm not sure. Let me look up sales real quick for Battlefield, and then I'll get out your hair for 2042. Let's see, Battlefield 2042, but it is a big IP. Let's see. So yeah, 2042 failed to meet sales expectations. But apparently a lot of players did come back after a certain point, which is weird. Which is very weird, but I can see 2042 not really doing that well. So they're probably gonna try to revitalize that with DICE alongside them. All you gotta do is make that shit lit like Battlefield 1. I said, you don't have to do much to make a great Battlefield game. Just make it big as shit. make that motherfucker like fun and just market the shit out of it and put a lot of modes in there, and I'm sure people will love that shit. But yeah, 2042 has low reviews as well. Okay, so hopefully, okay, it was definitely not received well and it didn't sell well. So if they do the opposite, then I mean, shit, you know. And they're a two-project team. I find that interesting. Motive said that. That means going forward from here, the future is going to be interesting. That's where the future of Dead Space lies, because a two-person team. Personally, I want all hands on deck for a new Dead Space anyway. I don't want you guys to be like working on, oh, I got to work on Battlefield, or I got to work on this and that. Even thinking from a business standpoint, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket while your team is like working on two other games and you got a game in the background as a PNG file just sitting there waiting to be revealed. Like, finish up what you have first, then you can put all hands on deck for other projects. I want all hands on deck for Dead Space 2 Remake. Like, I don't want no fucking set tripping, no half-ass measures, no fucking pitch meetings that either went awry or not. I want quality, just like I got from Dead Space 1 Remake. And if I get that quality, then I'm not gonna complain about it. I can wait, people. Like, so sometimes you can wait, sometimes things happen. But when more develops, I will talk about it and I will give my sincere and candid opinion on what I see, as opposed to making stuff up and saying that, oh, Dead Space is dead. We don't know, but Dead Space died before and it came back. Just letting you guys know that, like, it's died before for 10 years. Like, do you not get how this shit started to begin with? Like, when people say, oh, Dead Space is dead, do you think it didn't die after Dead Space 3? What are you talking about? Like, holy shit, the lack of self-awareness that I see with some people is unimaginable. Like, you could tell these people are unintelligent, because if they were, they would be bringing this stuff up. If they were, this would be in the conversation pool, but it's not. It's all fear-mongering. Dead Space is dead. It died before. And if this break is like very minuscule, let's say they don't make a Dead Space game in like the next few years or so, I want to say 7 or 10. At that point, then you could be upset. Then you could be worried. Maybe 6. I think 6 is like reasonable. Like, if we ain't doing nothing in the next console gen, it's something wrong, pimpin'. 6 or 7, I'm gonna say 7. If we ain't doing something in the next console gen, it's something wrong, pimpin'. All right, that's when it's something wrong. That's when it's a problem. That's when you can say, oh, it's creeping up to that dead status yet again. But if they do the opposite, and that is also possible, if they pull out an idea and it comes out relatively earlier than that, then what's gonna happen is all that assumption is gonna just age poorly. We don't know what's going on over there. All we know is that Motive is working on like 2 new games, and that's it. You know, I'm keeping it all together. Like, I'm saying it's all wait and see for me. But what do you guys think? I'm not freaking out about this news. I'm not gonna be like you got Young jumping on it real quick, and this dude makes the shittiest Kiryu voice of all time. And you know, this guy said that Death Stranding was the Dark Souls of exploration and open world adventure games. I'm not gonna take people like that seriously. I'm not gonna take any of these grifters seriously. I'm sorry. I never have, never will. I want to get information from the source. I want to hear it from their lips. I want to see it in writing when they say that Dead Space is dead. Otherwise, nothing to talk about. If you follow me on social media, text, all that, you know, Discords or whatever, you probably heard this opinion already. And it's not like EA has never canceled anything in green lighting or fucking pre-production before. Like, you look at their Star Wars games that got all canceled, man. Bruh, that situation is much worse than Dead Space. I'm glad I brought that up at the end of the video. Like, bruh, you know how many Star Wars games got canceled versus Dead Space? You know how many fucking Star Wars games got canned while in pre-production, which is worse than the initial rumors that we heard. Many of them, eons of them, games they spent money on getting canceled and shelved. I think we got it easy compared to other IPs that dealt with far more worse situations, right? Let's breathe. Let's calm down. Let's calm down. Let's take a bottle of tea or something, right? And let's calm down and let's assess the situation properly. I don't think it's anything wrong with waiting like maybe 6 or 7 years for some kind of answer in the middle. Like, the team has to move on eventually. They can't be doing Battlefield forever unless EA says so, which is a red flag. And they can't be working on Iron Man forever. It's got to release at some point. Development is going really well. And if I want to get real technical on motherfuckers, we had like short grace periods where people said big horror IPs were dead. Like Resident Evil. Remember after Resident Evil 6 and Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City, remember when all that shit came out and people were like, oh, Resident Evil is in dire straits, it's over, the franchise is dead, it's all action based, it's trash, we're never getting survival horror again, we're never getting old school, old style Resident Evil again with a hybrid of like horror and survival, it's all done, it's over with. What fucking happened when RE7 came out? What happened to all those opinions? Guess what? After time, after a short stint, after a window, when they reassessed the series, went back, understood the assignments, we got RE7. Anything could happen. Literally from this point forward, anything can happen. We had this short stint before with RE, man. They put that shit on ice and it came back. Silent Hill is now back. I think the moral of the story could be summarized as one particular term. Never say never until it's blatantly obvious that a horror franchise remains, well, dead. I'm Renegade Operative. I'm signing out. I'll see you guys next time. Later.